Good evening for Telesur. I'm Cody Weddle in Caracas, Venezuela. This is From the South. We begin with tonight's headlines. Tens of thousands of Venezuelans gather in support of Colombians and rejection of paramilitary activity. Plus, Tropical Storm Erica has killed at least 12 people as it plows across the Caribbean. Finally, truckers and indigenous Mapuche clash in the Chilean capital, Santiago, over access to land. And good evening once again. We begin here in Caracas, where thousands of Venezuelans have gathered in opposition to the activity of Colombian paramilitaries on the border and to show their friendship with the people of Colombia.
Ahí al sonar los tambores, esta negra se amaña, y al sonar de la caña.
President Maduro enjoying himself there. Oil workers, community groups, and indigenous peoples are among the crowds marching through the capital. The mobilization comes after both the Colombian and Venezuelan governments recalled their ambassadors on Thursday night. Now, 10 days ago, Venezuela closed part of its frontier with Colombia in an operation aimed at putting a stop to the mass smuggling of subsidized fuel, food, and medicine out of the country and into Colombia. Now, President Maduro also pointed out that Venezuela has suffered during Colombia's civil war and has been open to millions of Colombians fleeing the war and repression.
Que el pueblo de Colombia ha sido víctima de una guerra que pareciera infinita e interminable. Y desde 1948 en adelante, Venezuela ha recibido los coletazos de la guerra.
The people of Colombia have been victim of what seems like a never-ending war, endless. And since 1948 onward, Venezuela has received people from the war in Colombia. Thousands and thousands of families have arrived here running from the war, the pain, the hunger, death and repression, the unemployment, the lack of housing, and the lack of education. Venezuela has also suffered during the 6 decades of the war in Colombia.
Del hambre, del desempleo, de la falta de vivienda, de la falta de educación. Venezuela ha sido.
Venezuelan Vice President ratified that strong ties between both people will remain as long as cohabitation rules are respected within the law.
Tenemos que aprender a leer la realidad colombiana, a aprender a leer la realidad venezolana y generar códigos de convivencia, códigos de legalidad.
We must learn to read the Colombian and Venezuelan realities under the codes of coexistence and legality. Colombians will still work at the border, but within the law. We will send our products, but they will be exported lawfully. We will also send fuel, but at its value, not at the subsidy given to the Venezuelan people.
Vamos a mandar gasolina, puede ser, ¿por qué no? Pero vamos a cobrarle la gasolina al precio que le tenemos que cobrar, no al precio del subsidio que el socialismo le da al pueblo venezolano.
And following the recall of the ambassadors on Thursday night, the Venezuelan Foreign Minister Delcy Rodriguez said she regrets that the progress achieved during her meeting with her counterpart, Maria Angela Olguin, has now been set back. Now, both foreign ministers had agreed on Wednesday jointly to fight the smuggling and other criminal activity largely organized by right-wing paramilitaries along the border. Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos has requested a UNASUR meeting to address the border dispute between his country and Venezuela. Now, Santos has created a commission to attend to border issues and said he had ordered that the supply of gasoline and other subsidized goods smuggled into Colombia from Venezuela for huge profits be increased by 30%. The Colombian president also claimed that Colombians' rights weren't being respected after Venezuela has deported Colombians it claims are participating in illegal activities. And the FARC-EP now delegation in the Colombian peace talks in Cuba has backed the Venezuelan government, claiming its sovereignty must be respected. They have called for dialogue to resolve the dispute between the two countries and strengthen the peace process.
As neighboring countries, we need to unite so that peace will prevail, closing the spaces of tension and war-making, so that the rights of the people can shine through above all those who went through economic war and all kinds of conspiracy to destabilize the legitimacy government of President Nicolas Maduro.
In Colombia, the different social organizations grouped in the Broad Front for Peace have submitted a report on the verification of the latest unilateral ceasefire implemented by the FARC as part of the agreement reached in Havana to de-escalate the conflict. Our correspondent Natalia Margarita now reports from Bogotá.
As the FARC's unilateral ceasefire continues, the Broad Front for Peace has drawn attention to paramilitarism as something that constitutes a threat not just for Colombia's attempt to construct peace.
The export of Colombian paramilitarism is not fictitious. Neither is the product of the feverish imagination of Latin American leaders. It is a real fact. There are paramilitary groups operating beyond our borders, not just in Venezuela, but also in other Latin American countries.
The concern comes in the wake of Venezuela's government decision to close the border due to the increasing paramilitary activities, a move that has been used by some Colombian sectors in benefit of their own political agenda.
We want to acknowledge the value that Venezuela has had within its peace process, and we make a call that by no means Venezuela's role should be broken. We believe that what Uribe's political party is attempting in order to weaken a peace process that is significantly advancing.
And as the peace negotiations advance in Havana, so does the de-escalation of the armed conflict in Colombia, that, as according to the latest report on the FARC's unilateral ceasefire, implemented since the 20th of July.
The last month has been one of the least violent months within the armed conflict in our history. The least violent in the last 40 years.
However, the report highlights the escalation of hostilities against social movements and calls upon the government to cease the stigmatization and criminalization of popular leaders.
We have seen tremendous harassment towards the activities of members of the Broad Front for Peace and other democratic sectors that have been supporting the peace process in the region.
As the FARC has already extended its unilateral ceasefire, social organizations consider it is time for the government to tackle issues such as paramilitarism that are affecting peace construction in Colombia and neighboring Venezuela. Natalia Margarita, Telesur, Bogotá, Colombia.
In Central America now, in Guatemala, the Congress has launched an investigative committee. The 5-member panel is to decide whether to strip President Otto Pérez Molina of his immunity to face impeachment. Now, the president has been left increasingly isolated since investigators from the United Nations accused him of running a massive fraud scheme. Various of his officials and ministers have resigned. Most of them asked him to do the same, but he has publicly refused so far. Now, presidential elections will be held September 6th, and Pérez Molina's term ends in January. And meanwhile, tens of thousands of protesters continue to line the streets of Guatemala City in renewed demonstrations to demand the president's resignation. Persons of all walks of life joined the protest. Businesses closed their doors to take to the streets. Local media sources said the rally was likely to continue throughout Friday. Pérez Molina is involved in the scandal known as La Línea, or the Line. 30 people have been arrested in connection with the case. The small Caribbean island of Dominica has been severely smacked by Tropical Storm Erica, with reports of at least 20 people killed and many other gone missing. Several cities in the south are isolated, and the airport there is destroyed. The capital, Rosal, is also flooded as the river spilled over its bank. Meanwhile, the Dominican Republic, about 150 kilometers away, has issued a red alert. The storm is expected to hit Haiti and other Caribbean islands through Saturday. Florida, the state of Florida in the United States, has declared a state of emergency since Erica is expected there early Monday. In Santiago, Chile now, burnt trucks entered the capital and drove by the presidential palace to protest against rising violence against them in the south of the country. Now, as the trucks entered Mapuche communities living in the south, the south demonstrated against the drivers, and the government pleaded for urgent measures to recover their ancestral lands now in the hands of private companies, which has provoked violent land conflicts. The Mapuche people also highlighted the assassination of several community leaders in recent years, whose murders have gone without charge in most cases. And now to Peru with our correspondent Raul Mora. He explains now how the U.S. coordinated drug war in Peru has failed. But in spite of its downsides, the government continues with the same policies.
The Center for Legal and Social Studies has released a report on the state of human rights in Latin America in relation with drug eradication policies in the region. A contribution by the Center for Research on Drugs and Human Rights focuses on the situation in Peru under a policy coordinated with the United States that has been implemented for over 20 years.
An environment of authoritarianism and arbitrariness is reproduced with lack of transparency, accountability, and ultimately a severe situation of violation of fundamental rights of the farmers that are suspected of being members of Shining Path, of being drug traffickers. This situation is maintained year after year under the pretext of fear, and it does not allow to resolve the problems of poverty.
Shining Path was an armed political group that murdered tens of thousands of civilians during the 80s and 90s. Remnants of the group have become cocaine traffickers in a remote area of the Peruvian Amazon known as Brain. Civilians in the area are caught in confrontations between the government's eradication activities and the drug traffickers. Luis Trinidad is an activist with an organization in the area who is trying to raise awareness about human rights violations there.
When the military engages in confrontations with the remnants of Shining Path, the Quispe Palomino, and others, those who were affected by murders, bullet wounds, burning of houses, are the farmers of Union Mantaro, for example, and the same happens in Zangaro, as well as in other towns of Brain.
The drug eradication plan currently continued by President Ollanta Humala in the area includes limiting freedom of movement, arrests without warrants, large policing operations sweeping through towns, and frequent bombings destroying civilian structures. Such plan has little effect in eliminating cocaine production, with Peru maintaining a top position in the production of the drug. Rael Mora, Telesur, Peru.
Brazil's economy now has shrunk into a worse than expected recession in the second quarter of the year. All three economic activities, agriculture and fishing, the service sector and industry, showed negative growth. Altogether led to a negative growth of 1.9% on the previous semester. Investment fell 8.1% and household consumption 2.1%. Unemployment hit a 5-year high and consumer prices jumped 9% in 12 months. Cuba now is getting ready for the Pope's visit in September. An altar is being built in Havana's iconic Revolution Square, where Francis will hold an outdoor mass, and the city cathedral is under restoration. Pope Francis will visit the island from September 19th to 22nd, being the third one to do it in the past 17 years. International experts on public health, women's rights, and sexuality got together in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, for a forum on the emergency anti-conception pill that since the 2009 coup d'etat was declared illegal. Some members of the government have publicly declared that the pill is prohibited because it is a sin, as they say. Gerardo Torres now from Tegucigalpa.
Even though the Constitution of Honduras declares it a secular state, the actions of the government are more and more influenced by the Catholic and Protestant churches. A group of experts got together in the capital to discuss the prohibition of the emergency anti-conception pill, which has been banned since the 2009 coup d'etat, when the National Congress deemed it illegal, violating international human rights agreements that guarantee women's access to birth control.
Secular ethics is what the state has to have, not be part of religious discussions or intervene in religious matters, or take decisions based on religion. The real problem here is we have to have officially a secular state, but the state in reality is a religious state, because the churches are deciding the public policies.
Honduras is the only country on the continent where the emergency contraception pill is prohibited. When the law was approved, many public officials that supported the 2009 coup said that the pill were abortion pills and therefore a sin. For 6 years, women organizations have been presenting proof that the pill is just an anti-conception method that works 72 hours after the sexual relation and that can be used only in special cases. The government hasn't been interested in reopening the discussion.
The majority of lawmakers continue denying the right to talk and discuss about this in National Congress because they are afraid religious fundamentalists. They are always making laws for the same economic and political interests. I don't believe that they are acting because they have faith in something or because of their religious belief. They do it because they don't want to face the ecclesiastic leaders, because if they have them as enemies, they could lose many votes in the next elections.
The facts are very simple. Honduran women have less rights than all the other women on the continent because some groups say that contraception is a sin and should be prohibited, and these groups have strong influence over the so-called secular government. Gerardo Torres, Telesur, Central America.
And when we come back after the break, Greece has sworn in their new caretaker government. Find out who is heading it and what they plan to do when we return.
Discover Latin America and the world in our programs. Telesur Reports, The Real USA, the stories behind the tweets. Ataman, Lives, Know Your Body, Open Files. Exposing the conflicts that affect our people. Compelling personal stories and the most controversial events. See it all on telesurtv.net in English. Telesur. Wherever the news, you'll be there. An insight into Africa today. With Bill Fletcher. The Global African, only on telesurtv.net in English. Wherever the news, you'll be there. The truth behind the power. We lift the lid on some of the world's most ruthless figures. Open File, only on telesurtv.net in English. Wherever the news, you'll be there.
The new Greek caretaker government, headed by anti-austerity Supreme Court Judge Vasiliki Thanao, has been sworn in Athens. It will lead the country until the election set for September 20th. The caretaker administration is made up of both technocrats and political figures who announced their main priority will be to create an anti-corruption bill. Prime Minister Thanao also acknowledged they will likely have to deal with certain pressing issues, such as the influx of refugees. Current surveys point to a new victory for Syriza next month. Iraqi people are demanding reforms to improve national services and to put an end to government corruption. At least 20,000 protesters rallied in the capital of Baghdad and a string of other cities on Friday, the latest in a series of peaceful gatherings over the past month. The weekly rallies have been pressing for better basic services like power, water, and medical care, as well as an end to corruption and sectarian politics. Partly in response to the protest, Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi has announced several measures this month to combat corruption and mismanagement. The first 10 bodies of the 71 refugees found dead in a truck in Austria have arrived in Vienna to be examined. Forensic pathologists will seek to establish how they died after being found in an abandoned truck near the Hungarian border on Thursday. The vehicle came from Hungary and is believed to have been parked on the highway for at least 24 hours before it was discovered. 3 Bulgarians and an Afghan national have been arrested in Hungary. The Mediterranean Sea continues to be the deadliest route for refugees. More than 300,000 have risked their lives crossing it so far this year. Some 2,500 of them died in that attempt. This number does not include the latest boat tragedy off Libya on Thursday, where 200 are feared dead This year's arrivals tower high above those of 2014, when some 219,000 made the crossing over the entire year.
We interviewed some of the survivors yesterday, and they told us that smugglers were charging people money for allowing them just to come out of the hold to breathe. One survivor, his name was Abdel, he's 25 years old, from Sudan, told our colleagues, we didn't want to go down there, but they beat us with sticks to force us. We had no air, so we were trying to get back up through the hatch and breathe through the cracks in the ceiling. But other passengers were scared that the boat would capsize, so they pushed us back down and beat us too. Some were stamping on our hands.
7 people were wounded when extremists fired shells at residential neighborhoods in the Syrian capital of Damascus. The army responded by attacking the missile launch sites in the western Ghouta suburbs. This as a new truce in Zabadani had been reached. More now from Hazem Abdullah.
Extremists from the Army of Islam fired mortar shells on residential neighborhoods in the capital Damascus. The Syrian Ministry of Health reported 7 injuries as well as material damages. The Syrian army responded with attacks on the sites where the mortars were fired from.
We received several citizens injured as a result of the terrorist attacks with mortars on residential neighborhoods. We gave them the necessary treatment. They had a variety of injuries, and we are on a full alert status to do whatever it takes for the injured.
At the same time, a new truce of 48 hours has been reached with the armed groups in Zabadani, to the west of Damascus, which includes the villages of Freya and Al-Fu'a, which are certainly under terrorist siege in Idlib region, northern of Syria.
It is important not to understand this truce, as happened too often in the past. The Syrian army is strong and is making this truce to protect the lives of civilians in Kafaya and Al-Fu'a. But there are extremists who are not interested in a real agreement and can easily break this truce.
We support any truce. But look, the terrorists are putting pressure on civilians to agree to these truces in order to get out of Zabadani with minimal losses. We do not trust those terrorists.
The new truce includes the transfer of wounded militants from Zabadani by the Red Cross to the areas they control in Idlib province, in exchange for halting the attacks on the towns of Kafraya and Al-Fu'a, and allowing the elderly and the injured to leave. This would be a step towards a final agreement, which would include a complete withdrawal of the extremists from Zabadani to Idlib countryside. Hazem Abdullah, Telenews Syria.
A Thai court has issued an arrest warrant for a man over a second blast in Bangkok 10 days ago that caused no injuries. The blast near a pier came one day after the capital was struck by a deadly bombing in a Hindu shrine, which killed 20 people. Now, CCTV footage of the second attack showed a man in a blue shirt kicking a package off a footbridge and into the canal. Maybe we're going to see it there. No arrests so far have been made for any of the attacks. Excuse me. Harassed by Israeli gunboats, sufferings of Gaza fishermen continue as ceasefire marks 1 year on. More now from Noor Harazin.
The Israeli attacks against fishermen in the Gaza Strip have continued, despite a year has passed since Israel and the Palestinian national factions signed a ceasefire agreement. The conditions of fishermen in the coastal enclave are getting worse and worse, and their suffering is increasing as the Israeli occupation forces are chasing them when they try to earn their livelihood. On a daily basis, the Israeli naval forces save no chance to target Palestinian fishermen sailing offshore the coasts of blockaded Gaza, claiming they exceed an allowed fishing zone. Looking for a better living standard and escape from poverty, fishermen endanger their lives as the night closes in when they set sail into the waters and start their fishing trip with hope.
When we approach the 5.5 nautical mile limit of the fishing zone, the Israeli Navy opens fire towards us, detains or water sprays us. Sometimes they drown our boats or damage them. They know very well that the fishing is very good in the rocky zone between 8 and 12 nautical miles, while we fish in the sandy zone. They know good season of fishing, which improves in spring and October, and they are economically fighting us. Since the Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit was abducted, they have escalated attacks against us.
Gaza fishermen have been easy targets for the occupation forces ever since the ceasefire agreement that ended at deadly fighting in the Strip last August offered them a 6 nautical miles fishing limit, a limit that Israeli forces do not respect. Human rights activists say that this year has been the fiercest for Gaza fishermen, pointing out that the Israeli violations mounted disregarding any truce agreements. Nur Harazin, Telesu TV, Gaza.
And now it's time for our World News Roundup.
10 members of Nigerian-based Islamist militant group Boko Haram have been sentenced to death on terrorism charges in Chad. They were arrested after a twin attack in the country's capital 2 months ago that killed 34 people and injured dozens. Authorities believe that one of them is senior Boko Haram leader. Despite last weekend's attacks on refugees by far-right radicals in Germany, volunteers organised an event called the Welcome Festival for newly arrived refugees in Hayendu. They received donations and entertainment which was provided for the children. Originally banned by local authorities, the event was approved last minute by a court. India has opened the first all-women police station in the city of Gurgaon to deal with crimes committed against women across the state of Haryana. 27 police members and 50 anti-riot policewomen will be based at the station. Legal assistance and psychological rehabilitation will also be provided. A meeting between the Indian and Pakistani National Security Advisor on Sunday was called off amid a dispute about including the topic of Kashmir on the agenda. This after Pakistan's army chief accused India of targeting civilians during an exchange of fire across the border. At least 10 people are dead and 50 are injured. Poland has appealed for people to stop searching for a Nazi train that has been missing since 1945, which is rumoured to carry valuable treasures. This comes after 2 men have claimed they have found it and expect 10% of the value as reward. Authorities warn dangerous materials may also be on board.
Former FIFA Vice President Jack Warner is continuing his fight against extradition charges to the United States to face a dozen charges, including bribery, corruption, and wire fraud conspiracy. Warner has appeared before the Port of Spain Magistrate Court 4 times and said he wants his trial before the general elections, which is set for September 7th. Warner added that he believes the decision is politically motivated. In July, his lawyers called for a judicial and have made appeals to the country's highest courts, the London-based Privy Council. Dutchman Bert-Jan Lindeman won Stage 7 of the Vuelta a España cycling competition, which takes place in Spain. Lindeman was able to defeat Tour de France champion Chris Froome, who completed the stage a little over a minute behind him. Now the competition runs until September 13th and features 21 stages. In Berlin now, the world's first ever 3D printer for fruit gums is on display at a cafe there and will be used to meet the demands of customers in search of customized candies. Now, it's called the Magic Candy Factory. I want to see this here. And it was developed by a German company to produce customized fruit gums of different shapes and colors. Customers now can place their orders through an application on the internet for a little over $5. Pretty cheap. Customers have the option to have their names placed on their sweet treat as well. That's pretty cool, I guess. In Mexico now, let's take a look at this. Generations of cliff divers have earned a living putting on a show for tourists by diving off a 115-foot rock in the Pacific coast. There he goes. That looks scary, very scary. However, their livelihood is now under threat due to a wave of violence that has been sweeping the resort city of Acapulco. Nearly 500 people have been killed so far in 2015, and the 62 daredevils who have kept this 8-decade tradition alive are now worried about their future. Plenty more on those stories and others at our website, telesurtv.net/English. For Telesur English, I'm Cody Weddle. I hope you have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday.